Hello and welcome back to our study of Peninei Halacha, the teachings of Rebbe Eliezer Melamed Shlita. We are continuing our study in the laws of the 3 weeks, and we're getting closer and closer to the fast of Tisha B'Av. The next chapter that we'll learn, continuing off what we learned yesterday about listening to music, and this is Shmias Muzika Mimachshir Chashmali Beiti. So this is a very practical application. What about listening to music through electronic devices? So we spoke yesterday of live music. So Yesh Omrim, Shekamo she'asu lishmoa klei zemer b'hofa'a chaya b'shlosha shvuos. There are some that say that just as it is forbidden to listen to musical instruments in a live setting during the 3 weeks, kach asu l'shoma'am derech machshirim chashmalim beitim kedugmas radio v'tape. Similarly, depending what part of the world you come from, then it is also forbidden to listen to this type of music through electronic devices such as a radio or a tape. If anybody would listen to a tape today, they'd have to have their head checked, but obviously we're talking about electronic reproduction of music. So now we have MP3, streaming, Spotify, but of course, if you're on Spotify, you're listening to only this podcast, not anything else, but I digress. The only thing that's permitted during the 3 weeks are songs that are not accompanied by instruments, what we call a cappella. And he quotes from the Igros Moshe, from Ovad Yosef Shlita, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, from the Chavedas, and there are those that even forbid a cappella music, and he quotes from Rav Waldenberg the Tzitz Eliezer. Ulam, however, there are those that permit it. That we could listen to the radio, we could listen to music via electronic device, because what was prohibited by the Acharonim during this period was only live music playing from instruments and people playing instruments, because this has a festive, celebratory element to it. Radio or tape, but when you hear music on the radio or through some sort of album, download, whatever it might be, we don't have the same sort of festive feeling. He says when they made the first devices playing music electronically, obviously it was a new invention and people were very excited. People used to gather around the radio and listen. It was a family event. But today, now that we all have electronic devices, we mostly probably play them from our phones, or we stream from our phones through our cars or wherever it is we might be. If that's the case, there's not so much simcha involved in that. And he says, therefore, there's probably no reason to prohibit it during the 3 weeks. He says we can also differentiate between festive tunes and regular tunes. Only tunes which are overly festive, which, let's say, wedding songs, things that bring us extreme amounts of joy, that's what we prohibit. But regular songs, and certainly when we talk about sad songs, those are not to be prohibited during the 3 weeks. He even quotes the Gemara in Shabbos, that in the old days, in the times of the Gemara, when they had a levaya, when they had a funeral service, there were people that would accompany them with musical instruments, but this was to arouse feelings of tsar, feelings of pain and loss and mourning. And this was part of the mitzvah of escorting the dead. So the actual music was part of this sadness. Mikan, shein iser gorif al shmias kli zemer, ela iser b'mei avelos hu lishmo nigunim shel simcha. So the prohibition, he says, is not in listening to the essence of musical instruments, but it's listening to happy, joyful music. V'chein shemati me'avi Mori, and he quotes from his father, Rav Malamed, shelo rak shemutel hashmir shir matzavim al chor b'meliva kli zemer derech haradia b'tishas hayomim. He says not only is it allowed during the 3 weeks, and he says even the 9 days to listen to these types of sad songs on the radio, through a tape or a reproduction. But he says this is even a greater thing. He says because this will actually arouse feelings of mourning in an appropriate way in which one can sort of get into the mood for mourning for Tisha B'Av. In all amounts of intellectual honesty, as Rav Melamed always does, he always quotes the dissenting opinions. A very, very long footnote, which I'm not going to go into here, but he quotes from Igros Moshe and from Avad Yosef and many other poskim who absolutely prohibit listening to music on the radio during the 3 weeks. This is probably the normative approach before we get to the practical halacha, which I'll tell you in a second. But in the Welt, as they say, in the world, most people will not listen to any sorts of music with instrumentation on the radio. They will listen to sad music, they will listen to a cappella music, and they will put themselves in the mood. But there's also something to say about, you know what, during these 3 weeks, I'm not going to listen to music. I'm going to focus on other things. I'm going to listen to a shir. I'm going to perhaps think to myself, think about the Churban. So that seems to be the predominant opinion. But he says certainly if a person wants to be mekil, a person needs to be lenient, then yesh ami lismoch. And as we discussed during Sfiras Omer, that let's say someone is taking a long drive and you need the music to keep you awake, again, that's not for simcha, that's for a safety purpose. It's a different story altogether. So he says, halacha lamaisa, sanira lamaisa lefi hadeha makila, he says it would seem, practically speaking, that according to the lenient opinion, again, this is if you think that you can listen to certain music reproduced digitally during the 3 weeks. He says there are 3 categories. The first category is joyful, happy music, like what you would hear at a wedding. He says the second category are sort of parv songs, which do not have an overly amount of simcha nor an over amount of sadness. He said you put in the category most songs today. And also most classical music. Hashlishi, shirim atzuvim kedugma shiri avel al adam shemes al ar chumran. The third category are sad songs, particularly ones that are reflecting on the loss of a person or on the loss of the churban. So let's take, for instance, Al Naharos Bavel, many compositions to that beautiful chapter, which is often recited before benching during the 9 days. People have many different versions of it, and that certainly gets one in the mood, air quotes implied, for Tisha B'Av. So mitchilas shloshes hashavua, so from the beginning of the 3 weeks, yesh lehimana mishmias hachelik harishon. We should definitely, already from the first part of the 3 weeks, and that's the duration of the 3 weeks, we shouldn't listen to joyful wedding type music. V'hu shirei simcha. Rosh Chodesh Av, and from the beginning of Rosh Chodesh Av, yesh lehimana gam mishmias hachelik hasheni hamtzai. Then you should also refrain from the beginning of the 9 days from even the middle parv category of neither sad nor overly happy music. You can only listen to sad music. He says this is the custom of the Israeli channel Arutz Sheva, which Rav Melamed has spoken and written for extensively. But he says the custom of Arutz Sheva is that during the 3 weeks they would play regular songs that don't have an overly amount of simcha. Ubetishas hayomim l'shader shirim atzuvim shemaskirim ma'azinim esa'evel al churban beis hamikdash. And when they got to the 9 days, they would have an elevated sense of mourning, and they would only play songs that have to do with mourning on the churban of the beis hamikdash. And for those of us here in the States, and really it's worldwide, but our good friend Nachum Siegel, if you listen to his radio program in the morning, JM and the AM, he also has what's known as the 3 weeks format. And in the 3 weeks format, again, the music, the tone of the music, many a cappella songs are played during the 3 weeks. And then when you get to the 9 days, you kind of refrain from music altogether, lots of shiurim, lectures, interviews. And I'm always happy because happy, I'm really the wrong word to use because we're not supposed to be happy, but I'm happy because he often plays lectures from my Rebbe, Rabbi Beryl Wine, he should live and be well. Rabbi Melamed concludes this paragraph, Odnira shekasher shomim muzika b'kol ram. It would also seem that if you hear music on full volume, gam kasher istamit, hatzman nosenes l'shir chagigios, v'haru ne'aseh kashir simcha. A regular song that's not overly joyous, but if you play it full blast, it could arouse feelings of simcha. So therefore one should be careful not to listen to full volume these types of songs. Again, we don't want to put yourself in a state of extended simcha. Odnira, he says you should even not go to a concert. When we talked about public gatherings for music, you shouldn't go to a concert even if it's sad music during the 3 weeks. And even though it is mourning type of music, but going to a gathering, that's something which is in and of itself a festive gathering. So people get dressed up, they make a whole night out of it. So that's not something we should be doing during the 3 weeks. However, if the gathering is meant for the purpose of the 3 weeks of Tisha B'Av, so just think of what we would do in summer camp, that we would have a gathering of the children and the counselors and everyone to help arouse feelings of loss for the Beis HaMikdash, then certainly this would be allowed. This is not a simcha gathering, it is a purposeful gathering. So we have some of the guidelines. Again, there's a lot to talk about here, but we're just kind of scratching the surface. And even our entry and exit music, as you'll see, as I've mentioned the last couple of days, reflects, again, the tone of this period on the calendar where it's somber, it's serious, we are not engaging in acts of simcha, and we want to do whatever we can to remember the Churban Beis HaMikdash and to recognize what we had and what we lost, and hopefully we will all be zocha to have the Beis HaMikdash rebuilt. B'mher v'yameinu. Amen. Thank you again for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We'll see you here next time.